Rome had sent 3 legions into the forests of Germania. The man guiding them into disaster knew Roman tactics, Roman discipline, and Roman command from the inside. He knew because Rome had trained him. Rain and violent winds had turned the ground treacherous, the forest floor a trap of mud and torn earth. A Roman column that had once marched with the confidence of an empire was being cut apart piece by piece. Men who had spent their careers fighting in open fields found themselves boxed between wooded slopes and a narrow track, unable to form their lines, blinded by rain, timber, and broken ground. Spears came from the trees, then silence, then more spears. The soldiers dying in that forest did not know the man who had led them there had once worn a Roman uniform, held Roman citizenship, and eaten at their commander's table. They did not know he had been building this conspiracy since long before the march began. By the time some of them understood what was happening, it was already too late to matter. By the end of the march, 3 Roman legions would no longer exist. How does a Roman governor, commanding 3 full legions, walk his men into a slaughter organized by someone he trusted completely? By the early 1st century AD, Rome had pushed its frontier deep into Germania, the wild, forested territory east of the Rhine. Roman armies had crossed the river repeatedly, building forts and negotiating with local tribes, treating the region less like conquered ground and more like a province in the process of becoming one. Roman administration increasingly behaved as though conquest was giving way to provincial rule. Local elites were being drawn into Roman structures. Tribute was being organized. Roman law was beginning to apply to disputes tribal custom had once settled. Germania was not Gaul. The tribes east of the Rhine were fragmented, often hostile to one another, with no single ruling structure Rome could dominate outright. What held Roman control together was not overwhelming force spread across the territory, but the cooperation of local leaders who had reason to work with Rome. Some of them raised, in part, inside the Roman system itself. One of them commanded Roman auxiliary troops. One of them held Roman citizenship and equestrian rank. He was about to become the architect of Rome's worst frontier disaster in living memory. Arminius was born into the Cherusci, a Germanic people living east of the Rhine, in the final years before the turn of the century. As a young man, he entered Roman service, likely as the son of an allied chieftain sent to serve alongside Roman forces, a common arrangement meant to bind local elites to Rome. He rose through the auxiliary ranks, was granted Roman citizenship, and received the rank of equestrian, placing him among the empire's recognized nobility. He had, by any outward measure, become a product of the Roman system. He understood Roman military culture from the inside, its tactics, its discipline, its command structure, and that understanding made him valuable enough to advise a sitting governor. That trust was the point. Publius Quinctilius Varus, appointed governor of Germania around 7 AD, relied on local nobles like Arminius to manage a region Rome did not fully control on its own. Varus was an experienced administrator, not primarily a battlefield general, and he treated the province as settled territory, applying Roman legal and taxation structures with a confidence the region did not yet warrant. Arminius became a trusted companion within Varus's circle, sharing his table and his confidence. Nothing in Varus's position suggested danger from that direction. Nothing, at least, that Roman sources record him noticing in time. The danger Varus failed to see was not military weakness. His 3 legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, along with cavalry and auxiliary cohorts, represented a serious concentration of Roman power, likely 15,000 to 20,000 men, including support personnel. Rome had brought an army built to win battles into terrain where it could barely become an army at all. 3 weaknesses made that possible. The column stretched for miles, along a track barely wide enough to pass single file in places. so no single officer could see, let alone command, the whole force at once. The baggage train, tents, tools, grain, artillery, and the belongings of thousands of soldiers and camp followers slowed movement to a crawl. And the terrain itself, dense forest cut by ravines and softened by autumn rain, prevented the legions from doing the one thing that made them dangerous, forming a line. Varus did not know he would end up fighting there. He was marching toward winter quarters, not toward a battle, expecting nothing more dangerous than a routine march through territory he believed was pacified. A Roman army fighting on ground it chose could dominate almost any opponent it faced. A Roman army marching, unprepared, through ground chosen by someone else was a different problem entirely.
In September of 9 AD, word reached Varus of a local uprising, a tribal revolt requiring his attention before the army settled into winter camp. The report came, according to the tradition preserved by later Roman historians, through Arminius himself, or through channels he controlled. It described unrest that needed to be addressed quickly, and it recommended a route that would take the army off its established road and through unfamiliar country to deal with it. Then came the warning. Segestes, a rival Germanic noble, went to Varus directly. He said Arminius could not be trusted. He said a conspiracy was already in motion. He asked Varus to arrest Arminius that same night before the column moved another mile. It is one of the most remarkable moments in the entire story. A governor handed the exact truth, by name, in advance, and choosing not to act on it. Varus's confidence in Arminius and in the broader stability of the province outweighed the warning. He read it as ordinary tribal rivalry rather than the alarm it actually was. The column began to move. Rain had already begun falling, turning the ground to mud before the army left its position. The baggage train slowed everything further, and then Arminius made his excuses. He told Varus he would ride ahead to gather allied forces to help put down the uprising, forces that, in reality, did not exist to help Rome. He left the column as a trusted advisor. He would not return as one. Every mile the column advanced now carried it deeper into ground that had been chosen for it, not by it, and there was no longer a straightforward way back to the road they had left behind. What Arminius had built was not a single ambush, but a coalition assembled quietly before the march. He had moved between several Germanic groups, persuading leaders who often distrusted one another that a coordinated strike against the Roman column was possible and worth the risk. That alone was a significant achievement, and it required someone with credibility in both worlds. Someone who understood exactly how a Roman army moved, camped, and reacted to threats, because he had served inside that system himself. The mechanics of the trap were simple, and that simplicity was the danger. A false uprising pulled Varus off the established road. The new route forced the column to stretch out for miles through forested, broken terrain, unable to form the kind of tight defensive line legions relied on. Arminius rode away from the column under cover of gathering reinforcements. Behind the tree line, the coalition he had spent months assembling began moving into position. Deeper into the forest the Romans marched, further from any road they knew, while armed men gathered on the high ground above them, unseen. Then came the first attack. The result was not one clean battlefield engagement Rome might still win through discipline. It was a running collapse, worn down over days, with the terrain itself doing as much damage as any single clash of arms. For the plan to succeed, Varus had to trust the false report enough to leave the road. The coalition had to hold together and strike with coordinated timing, and Arminius had to slip away without suspicion. Any one of those failing could have unraveled the operation before it began. Turning against Rome also meant turning against the system that had given Arminius rank, citizenship, and standing. If the coalition failed, or word reached Varus too early, he stood to lose everything, likely including his life. The attacks began as the columns struggled through the narrowest stretches of the route, where the road, if it could still be called that, ran between marshland and wooded high ground. Javelins and spears came from the tree line, striking soldiers who had no room to form a shield wall, no clear line of sight to the enemy, and no way to bring the column's full strength to bear against an attacker that refused to stand and fight in the open. This was the moment the character of the battle changed permanently. A force facing one decisive clash retains options: reform, counterattack, force a resolution through discipline and numbers. A force being worn down along miles of impossible terrain has no such option. Retreat offered no safety, since the same ground that had trapped them stretched behind as well as ahead. Advancing meant walking further into ground the enemy had already prepared. What followed was not one battle, but several, spread across days. On the first day, the attacks came in short, scattered bursts. Strikes from the trees, then silence, then more strikes, as the coalition tested the column's cohesion without committing to a full engagement. The Romans, still disciplined, fought their way to defensible ground and managed to build a fortified camp overnight, a response that briefly slowed the collapse.
It did not stop it. The column pushed on the next morning, back into open, less defensible ground, and the attacks resumed. Cassius Dio describes the fighting extending into a fourth day, with rain and violent wind returning to worsen the ground underfoot, while the Germanic forces attacking them grew in number, as word of the ambush spread, and more fighters joined the coalition already in the field. Each day cost the Romans men, formation, and cohesion they could not replace, while the coalition, fighting on ground it knew, could withdraw, regroup, and strike again. By the final stage, with the surviving formation reduced to fragments, and no path forward offering any real chance of survival, Varus was severely wounded. According to the Roman accounts that survive, he chose to take his own life rather than face capture, a choice several of his senior officers reportedly followed. What remained of the legions fought on without unified command. Some units cut down where they stood, others attempting to break through enemy lines in smaller, uncoordinated groups. A small number of soldiers are said to have escaped and carried word back across the Rhine. The greater part of 3 legions, along with their eagles, the standards representing Rome's military honor itself, did not return. Archaeological finds in the Kalkriese region, scattered coins, weapon fragments, and mass graves containing human and animal remains, support the broad outline of this account. Kalkriese is widely regarded as one major site of the disaster, though the exact route and geography of the full, multi-day fighting remain debated among historians. What the evidence on the ground and the ancient written accounts agree on is the outcome. An organized Roman force, marching under its own commander, ceased to exist as a fighting formation within the span of a few days. The scale of the loss stunned Rome. 3 legions, roughly a tenth of Rome's entire legionary establishment, had been destroyed in a matter of days, along with their commander and their standards. According to the historian Suetonius, when word reached Emperor Augustus, he was said to have struck his head against a door in grief and demanded the return of his legions, a demand no one could answer. Rome did not simply withdraw and stay gone. In the years that followed, the general Germanicus led major campaigns back across the Rhine, recovering 2 of the 3 lost eagles, and inflicting heavy losses on the very coalition that had destroyed Varus. But the deeper ambition, permanent conquest of the lands between the Rhine and the Elbe, was eventually abandoned, with the decisive withdrawal generally placed around 16 AD. The Rhine, not some deeper line into Germanic territory, became the practical, lasting boundary of Roman power in the region. None of this means the battle single-handedly preserved an independent Germany, an idea later ages found useful for their own purposes. What it meant in the world of 9 AD was narrower and still enormous. An empire that expected to absorb this territory decided, in the years that followed, that it could not. Arminius became a unifying figure among Germanic tribes for a time, though that unity did not last. He was killed years later, not by Rome, but by rivals within his own alliance, a reminder that the loyalty he had exploited so effectively against Varus was never guaranteed to hold for him either. Rome did not lose 3 legions because Arminius knew nothing about Roman warfare. It lost them because he knew it intimately. Rome had given him rank, citizenship, military experience, and access to its world. In the forests of Germania, he turned that knowledge back against the empire that had taught him. Rome trained Arminius to fight. It never imagined he would choose Rome as his enemy.